Welcome to the deep dive. Today, we are opening up a file that is not just about law, but about power, paranoia, and the slow, calculated destruction of civil society.
It really is, yeah.
Our topic is maiestas, the ancient Roman concept of treason, and specifically the dangerous transformation it underwent. It went from protecting the state to protecting the ego, really, of a single man.
That transformation is, well, it's the tragic arc we're tracing today, isn't it, in the Roman Republic? Maiestas?
Yeah.
It was a grand term, almost sacred, you could say.
Meaning what exactly?
It meant the dignity of the Roman people, the majesty of the state itself,
Yeah.
the collective. But the moment that dignity became, inextricably linked to the person of the emperor, that's when the legal framework really started to break down.
Okay.
And our sources, they provide this terrifying historical roadmap. It shows how systems that were designed for public security were gradually sort of co-opted for political tyranny.
Right. And our mission today really is to unpack these sources, to understand the mechanism of that co-option. How did it actually happen? We want to see how the legal machinery, from the difficulty of getting proof in the Greek world, which we'll touch on, to the systematic abolition of jury courts in Rome, how all this led to a system where political suspicion became, well, basically indistinguishable from legal guilt.
It's a chilling progression.
We'll be looking at specific, quite chilling examples that illustrate how quickly the law stopped being a shield, for the people and became a sword, wielded primarily for things like asset forfeiture and just settling political scores.
Absolutely. It's a dark path.
So to really appreciate the depth of this change, we have to start, I suppose, with the Republican ideal of maiestas. What did it look like before the emperors got their hands on it?
Well, in its earliest form, it was focused on pretty concrete stuff. Betrayal, direct military harm, things you could actually point to.
Not just bad-mouthing someone.
Exactly. It wasn't about subjective offense or disrespect in the way we might think of it later.
Yeah.
It was about tangible damage to Rome's physical or political body, actions that genuinely threatened the state.
What's fascinating about the Republican period, though, is the scarcity of detailed legal records about maiestas prosecutions, isn't it, compared to the flood we see later?
That's a really important point. It suggests that while the crime definitely existed, it wasn't yet this omnipresent, weaponized tool of social control that it became under the emperors.
So it was reserved for genuinely high crimes. Big stuff.
Big stuff, exactly. We catch a glimpse of the formal process in the Verrine orations. Cicero's prosecution of Varro.
Oh, yes, Verres, the notoriously corrupt governor.
Infamous. And Cicero mentions a specialized treason court. Now, this wasn't some, ad hoc political committee set up for the occasion.
It was a real court.
It seems so, yeah. A formal tribunal for dealing with crimes against the state, high crimes.
And the specific charge against Verres, that tells us a lot, too, right? It helps define the scope of Republican treason.
Absolutely. He wasn't accused of, insulting a senator or making a joke about a consul. Nothing like that.
No, it was serious.
Very. He was accused of a grave betrayal, taking bribes to set enemy captains free. Think about that. Directly endangering Roman soldiers and interests.
Okay, so that's clear-cut harm to the state.
Precisely. Cicero challenges Verres to prove his actions were even legal before this treason court. That challenge really situates the charge firmly within the realm of compromising Roman security, betraying military interests.
So the focus was on demonstrable action, things that threatened the physical safety of the Republic.
Yes, and that stands in stark contrast to the later imperial definition, which, as we'll see, could encompass almost anything deemed disrespectful to the emperor's person, even potentially a careless word.
But even back then, securing proof against these high-status officials, even for concrete crimes, that must have been incredibly difficult.
Oh, notoriously so. It wasn't just a Roman problem either. If we look across the Aegean to the Greek world, we find some really dramatic precedents for this exact challenge.
Like who?
The fall of the Spartan general Pausanias. It's a magnificent case study, almost theatrical, really. It shows the difficulties governments face trying to prosecute their own elites.
Pausanias. He was a big deal, wasn't he? A war hero.
A colossal figure, victor of the Battle of Plataea, instrumental in defeating the Persians, a genuine hero, but, well, power corrupted him, absolutely.
The classic story.
It is. He became vain, arrogant, and eventually started this treacherous intrigue with the Persian court. Maiestas, they called it.
And what was his specific crime? What was he actually offering the Persians?
It was utter betrayal. He offered to enslave his own city, Sparta, and the rest of Hellas, all of Greece, to Xerxes. Total betrayal of the Panhellenic cause he'd previously championed.
Wow, that's breathtaking ambition and treachery.
And the stakes were immense. He even planned to marry Xerxes' daughter to seal the compact. Yet, despite the obvious nature of his disloyalty, his suspicious behavior, the Spartan authorities, the ephors, they struggled massively to get hard evidence.
They couldn't just accuse him based on suspicion.
Not someone of his stature. Not easily. They needed something solid that would satisfy a legal conviction, or at least public opinion. Initially, they only managed to punish him for a few minor acts, things like injuries to individuals that they could prove.
So he got away with the main charge.
For a while, yes. He was let go. And he was apparently arrogant enough to believe he could secure a full acquittal later, probably through bribes. It shows his complete lack of respect for the law or the state he supposedly served.
So the core problem was evidence. How do you convict a major military hero of secret plotting without irrefutable proof?
Exactly. And the way they finally got the proof, it's like something out of a spy novel. It involved a confidential servant Pausanias was using as a messenger.
The messenger to the Persians?
To Artabazus, the Persian satrap, yes. This servant, he started noticing something deeply disturbing.
What was that?
Every previous messenger Pausanias had sent on this particular sensitive errand, well, they never came back.
Oh.
Yeah. So, driven by sheer self-preservation, the servant did something risky. He broke the seal of the letter he was supposed to deliver. His own letter. And he found his own death warrant written inside. Pausanias had ordered the Persians to kill him once the message was delivered.
Unbelievable. That's cold.
Stone cold.
Yeah.
And that's the moment a fearful servant turns from loyal subordinate into an absolute indispensable informer. He had the proof.
But even with the informer and the letter, the ephors, the Spartan magistrates, they still felt they couldn't just risk a direct confrontation. Worried Pausanias would deny it or use his influence?
Precisely. He was still Pausanias the hero. So they had to resort to pure stagecraft. A dramatic stratagem that honestly reveals the weakness of their legal system against powerful men.
What did they do?
They set up this ingenious trap at the sanctuary of Taneris, a sacred place, legally protected ground. They built a partitioned hut.
Okay.
The servant went into one room, acting as a suppliant seeking sanctuary, making a show of it. Meanwhile, the ephors concealed themselves in the adjoining room, hidden behind the partition, listening.
The hidden microphone.
Exactly. When Pausanias arrived, furious, demanding to know why the servant was seeking refuge there, the servant played his part. And Pausanias, feeling secure or perhaps just enraged, he spoke freely.
And admitted everything.
He admitted the whole truth, as the source says, of his treacherous designs. All while the ephors were listening next door. They finally had their confession, overheard in a way that couldn't easily be denied.
That stagecraft is so telling, isn't it? It shows that even in these supposedly more structured republican systems, whether it's Sparta or early Rome, the rule of law really struggled against high-status figures.
They really did.
They had to basically cheat to get a confession. It highlights the massive procedural barriers that existed against tackling elite corruption or treason.
It absolutely underlines that challenge. And, if we shift our focus slightly over to Athens, we see a related, though culturally distinct, kind of political accusation.
Athenian democracy, known for its lively debates.
Lively is one word for it. Athenian political life was often dominated by aggressive public litigation. The legal system there was, shall we say, quite permissive in what it allowed rhetorically in court.
Right. The rhetoric of accusation was often centered on character assassination, not just, specific legal violations. We see this so vividly in the speeches of Demosthenes, for example.
Absolutely. Accusations were frequently hinged on proving your own superior character in public service versus the alleged flaws of your opponent.
Like Aeschines.
Aeschines is a perfect example. When he was attacked, he felt compelled to launch into this detailed account of his distinguished military record. Why? Just to counter the sarcasm and insinuations about his citizenship and his family background.
So if you couldn't get them on a legal technicality,
you attacked them personally. And the sources confirmed that Athenian slander laws were, well, pretty toothless in practice. It made it incredibly risk-free to just pluck allegations out of the air, as one source puts it.
Like that claim about Demosthenes' mother being Scythian, which was basically an ethnic slur meant to undermine his entire standing.
Exactly. It questioned his Athenianness, his right to even participate fully in public life. He never faced a formal legal challenge over it, as far as we know, but the mud stuck. That was the point.
So that kind of corrosive accusation wasn't necessarily aimed at getting a formal conviction in court.
Not always. It was often about destroying reputation, undermining credibility in the political arena. It was a rhetorical weapon, pure and simple.
So while the Athenians weaponized rhetoric and open court, the Romans, as we move into the imperial period, they started to weaponize the law itself.
That's the crucial shift. By consolidating lethal, centralized power under the emperor, the Spartans had the difficulty of prosecuting Pausanias well. That problem was effectively solved in Rome by simply ensuring the court answered directly to the person doing the accusing, or at least the person whose interests were being served.
And this transition from the sheer difficulty of obtaining evidence, like with Pausanias, to the terrifying efficiency of judicial terror under the emperors, that's exactly what we need to unpack next. Because the core tragedy of maiestas is tied directly to the dismantling of those old Republican jury courts, the questions.
Those jury courts, they were really the backbone of criminal jurisdiction in the late Republic and the early Principate. They represented citizen involvement, checks on power, adherence to tradition, all the things the emperors weren't so keen on.
But under the emperors, this system was, starved of resources, systematically undermined?
Both. It wasn't usually an overnight abolition, more like death by 1,000 cut, or perhaps neglect.
How did that undermining start? It wasn't an immediate axe, was it? It seems like a slow process of decay, starting subtly, perhaps under Tiberius.
Tiberius played a critical, maybe passive-aggressive role in weakening the system. Instead of actively abolishing the courts, at first anyway, he simply neglected to fill vacancies in the jury decuries.
The jury panels.
Exactly. The panels from which jurors were drawn. Imagine a legal system designed to run on, say, 1,000 jurors, and the emperor deliberately only appoints 500, letting the rest stay empty.
The whole thing grinds to a halt. Or close to it.
That's a profound institutional failure, isn't it? But it's disguised as maybe just bureaucratic inefficiency or negligence. The practical consequence, though, would be crippling backlogs, overburdened remaining jurors, and inevitably a loss of public faith in the system's ability to deliver timely justice.
It softens it up for replacement.
Precisely. The system became strained, weakened, making it easier to argue for a more efficient alternative. The real active shift, the push towards the emperor's personal justice, began later with Caligula.
Right, Caligula. He initiated what the sources called the first concerted attempt to regularize the emperor's personal court, the cognitio.
Yes, cognitio extra ordinem, trial outside the normal process. It wasn't entirely new. Emperors had intervened before, but Caligula seems to have been the first to make it a central, dependable function of imperial governance, especially for sensitive political trials.
So what did this imperial cognitio actually look like? Was it just the emperor deciding everything alone?
Our source, Dio Cassius, notes that Caligula judged cases both alone and sometimes with the Senate present. But, and this is the critical part, he always retained the final unchallengeable say.
So the Senate might be there for show, but the decision was his.
Essentially, yes. This fundamentally shifted the nature of justice. It was no longer a verdict derived from deliberation among peers guided by established law, but a decision stemming from a single, absolute source of authority, based on whatever criteria the emperor chose.
And crucially, Caligula made sure these personal decisions carried legal weight. The sources note he published his verdicts, known as decreta.
Yes, and this is where the legal system gets truly warped. By publishing his decreta, Caligula wasn't just resolving individual cases. He was signaling that the emperor's personal judgments, even those perhaps rendered on the spot or driven by political whim or personal animosity, were acquiring the force of legal precedents.
So they became part of the law.
Effectively, yes. Centuries of meticulously developed legal tradition, statutes passed by assemblies, interpretations by jurists, all of that was now being actively shaped, potentially overridden, by the will and personality of one man. It completely bypassed the traditional legislative and judicial processes.
That makes the emperor not just the judge and executioner, but the living, breathing source of law itself. Wow.
It's a profound concentration of power.
And Claudius, who followed Caligula, surprisingly perhaps, he accelerated this centralization, didn't he?
He did. Despite his reputation sometimes of being more traditional, judicial authority continued to consolidate under the emperor or his appointed prefects. The urban prefect, for example, became hugely important.
The prefect of the city of Rome.
Right. This shift wasn't just administrative tidying up. It meant that the people running Rome's criminal justice system were direct appointees of the executive, chosen for loyalty, replacing the notionally independent citizen juries.
Were there any attempts to push back, to stop this decline? Did anyone try to revitalize the jury system?
There were some efforts, yeah, but they seemed short-lived, almost desperate perhaps. We see Elagabalus much later creating a sixth decury of jurors drawn from the humiliores, the lower social classes.
Why would he do that?
It's debated. Maybe it was a genuine attempt to broaden participation, or maybe, more cynically, it was just an attempt to stack the system with jurors seen as more pliable or dependent on imperial favor. Either way, it didn't last. The tide was running too strongly toward centralization.
And the final nail in the coffin for the jury court seems to come much later, under Severus Alexander, and ironically, through the actions of a very famous jurist, Ulpian.
It is deeply ironic, isn't it? Ulpian, often hailed as one of the greatest figures of Roman law, a champion of legal principles. But he also served as praetorian prefect, a very powerful administrative and judicial role, from 222 to 228 AD. And in that capacity, he was tasked with reorganizing the criminal courts.
And he saw the old questions as
Archaic, inefficient, outdated. From an administrator's point of view, perhaps. So, under his guidance, the very last surviving public jury court, the Quaestio de Adulteris, the court dealing specifically with crimes of adultery, was abolished.
Let's just pause on that specific point. Why is the abolition of the adultery court so significant? It sounds almost trivial compared to treason.
Because it wasn't just about policing morality. It symbolized the final stand of citizen involvement, however flawed, in the regular criminal justice system in Rome. With the Quaestio de Adulteris gone, the urban prefect became the sole regular criminal jurisdiction in Rome and its immediate surroundings.
So one guy appointed by the emperor.
Essentially, yes. Or at least, the emperor's administration held all the cards. The traditional checks and balances, the jury element, were gone. Those political trials, the maiestas cases, which Caligula was already conducting via his personal cognitio, well, now the entire system was officially aligned. The legal structure was perfectly tuned, you could say, for political abuse. No more inconvenient juries.
And when justice is centralized like that under an autocrat, the very definition of treason fundamentally changes, doesn't it?
Completely.
It stops being a crime requiring demonstrable action against the state, like Verres freeing enemy captains. It becomes a crime defined by suspicion, by association, and maybe most powerfully by fear.
Exactly. It moves from maiestas populi Romani, the majesty of the Roman people, to maiestas principis, the majesty of the princeps, the emperor himself.
Diminished majesty.
The law of diminished majesty. That's a good way to put it. This new legal reality meant that even the appearance of diminishing the emperor's stature, or perhaps the stature of those close to him, could be interpreted as a capital offense. And this is where the law becomes a tool for immediate, brutal social and political control.
We see this really acutely in the case of Abudius Russo, right?
Yes. Russo's case is telling. He was an ex-aedile, a former magistrate. He wasn't accused of plotting rebellion or anything like that.
What was his crime?
He was condemned and banned from Rome simply for menacing a commander, a man named Gnaeus Cornelius Lentulus Gaetulicus. And the root cause, it sounds almost petty, but it was deadly serious. Political association.
How so?
The issue was Gaetulicus's choice of son-in-law. He had betrothed his daughter to a son of Sejanus.
Sejanus. Tiberius's powerful, influential, and ultimately doomed praetorian prefect.
The very same. After Sejanus's fall from grace and execution, anyone associated with him became instantly toxic, radioactive. To be linked, even through marriage plans, to a potential rival, or worse, a condemned enemy of the throne, it was potentially lethal.
And Russo was condemned just for objecting to this connection, or pointing it out.
For menacing Gaetulicus over it. The source says he menaced him. It shows how incredibly toxic and pervasive the climate of suspicion had become. Merely highlighting a dangerous association could get you condemned.
It's a remarkable illustration of guilt by association, taken to the extreme. Gaetulicus himself must have been in an impossible position.
Absolutely. He was connected to Sejanus, a figure who had been favored by Tiberius, but who had since fallen catastrophically, rendering all his former connections suspect.
So how did Gaetulicus defend himself? He must have been terrified.
His defense is a masterpiece of cynical, high-stakes political maneuvering. Forget legal arguments about Russo's actions. Gaetulicus went straight for the emperor.
What did he do?
He wrote directly to Tiberius, and he argued, quite audaciously, that his connection with Sejanus had actually been initiated by Tiberius himself, back when Sejanus was in favor.
Wow. So he's saying, you told me to do this.
Essentially, yes. He argued that a mistake or a past association encouraged by the emperor should not suddenly become a capital offense for some people while being harmless for others, namely Tiberius himself. He was basically telling the emperor, if I'm guilty for associating with Sejanus, then logically you're complicit because you promoted him.
That takes unbelievable nerve. He wasn't relying on legal innocence at all. He was leveraging institutional dependency and, frankly, blackmail.
It's pure power politics. And he didn't stop there. He further threatened Tiberius, warning him that he, Gaetulicus, would regard any attempt to remove him from his command, his supersession, as a death warning.
Meaning?
Meaning he commanded legions in his province. He was effectively demanding to keep his province and his military command, using the implied threat of mutiny, or at least non-cooperation, to protect himself from these politically motivated treason charges.
Incredible. This incident just reveals the profound instability created by weaponizing maiestas, doesn't it? The law was so personalized, so tied to imperial whim, that a successful defense relied not on evidence or legal principle, but on counter-leverage and military power.
Exactly. The system was eating itself.
And this atmosphere of paranoia, it only got worse in the later empire, didn't it? Transforming suspicion into almost a state policy that actively undermined effective governance. Let's jump forward a bit to the mid-350s AD during the time of the commander Silvanus.
Ah, yes, Silvanus. His story, as told by Ammianus Marcellinus, is another chilling example. Silvanus was traduced by plotters at court. That's all we know initially.
Just court intrigue. No specifics needed, apparently.
Just the whisper of suspicion of treason was enough. And the administrative response that followed is what's truly terrifying and revealing.
It illustrates how fast an accusation could just cascade into total ruin for someone.
Instantly. An assistant, an official named Epidemius, was dispatched to Gaul, where Silvanus was stationed. And the first thing he did upon arrival, he immediately began seizing the assets of Silvanus's servants and dependents.
Before any trial, before any formal sentence.
Long before. Crucially, Ammianus reports he did this as if that man were already prescribed and under sentence of death. The suspicion became the verdict in practice. The accusation became the sentence, at least financially.
No due process, no time for defense, just immediate seizure.
Exactly. The state's agents were empowered, or felt empowered, to begin the financial execution immediately upon the mere suggestion of treason. It bypassed any pretense of justice.
This immediate pre-trial asset forfeiture must have created absolute chaos. Why were these officials like Epidemius so focused on grabbing property rather than, say, investigating the actual alleged treasonous plot?
Well, that leads us directly into the next crucial point. The entire system was increasingly driven by financial motives.
Follow the money.
Always. But the immediate consequence, as Ammianus vividly reports, was the total breakdown of authority and security in Gaul. While officials like Epidemius were preoccupied with plunder, and Silvanus himself was under attack and fighting for his political life, the actual province suffered.
How so?
The region was pillaged by barbarians, without help coming from anyone. The political paranoia simmering in the emperor's court, acted upon instantly by greedy officials, led directly to the failure of frontier defense. People died because of court gossip and financial predation.
Right, that financial incentive. It really seems like the engine driving this entire system of terror, doesn't it? If political suspicion is the fuel.
Then confiscation of wealth is the lucrative product. It's what ensures the cycle continues. Treason in the imperial period wasn't just a legal category, it became an economic instrument.
A way for the state or the emperor to get rich.
Precisely. The ultimate legal consequence of high crimes against the state, perditio as it was sometimes called, often included damnatio memoria.
The condemnation of memory, we hear that phrase a lot.
And it went far beyond just erasing a name from monuments, though they did that too. It had immediate, deep, and crucially retroactive financial consequences on the entire estate of the condemned person.
Okay, let's dig into the mechanics of that. Retroactive financial impact. How could the state recover property that had already been, say, legitimately distributed from a will before the person was even charged?
This is where the law gets really intricate and, frankly, predatory. There was a legal mechanism called the actio utilis, essentially, a useful or extended legal action. If a person suffered damnatio memoria, their memory was condemned, meaning legally they sort of ceased to exist honorably.
Okay.
Consequently, their will could be declared void, because a person with a condemned memory couldn't legally hold or pass on property in the eyes of the state. And if the will was void,
then any legacies or inheritances paid out from it were invalid.
Potentially, yes. Legacies that had already been paid out to heirs or beneficiaries could be recovered by the state using this actio utilis.
So let me get this straight. If my uncle was a senator, died, left me some money in his will, and I received it. But then 5 years later, maybe under a new emperor, he's posthumously accused of treason and suffers damnatio memoriae. The state could come back to me and demand that inheritance back.
That's exactly the implication. The sources state the condition was that the accusation of perduelio had to be brought after those legacies had already been paid out. It confirms the long, devastating reach of the state's claim over the accused's entire financial footprint.
Wow. That means wealth was never truly secure, was it? Not even for the inheritors, the family, the associates of the elite. Every single legal transaction linked to someone who might one day be condemned was potentially reversible.
It created incredible uncertainty, and it essentially turned the legal system into this sophisticated, state-sponsored tool for wealth redistribution.
Straight into the imperial treasury, the fiscus.
Absolutely, the fiscus. And unlike the old Republican state treasury, the aerarium, the fiscus was often seen as being much more closely tied to the emperor's personal finances, his resources. It reinforced that direct link between judicial terror and imperial enrichment.
And the system didn't just profit the emperor at the top, did it? It actively incentivized private individuals to participate in the persecution.
We hear about the delatores, the informers.
The infamous delatores. While our specific source material here doesn't explicitly name them in these particular cases, the underlying financial mechanism that encouraged accusation was definitely in place and well established in Roman law generally.
How did that work? Did informers get a cut?
Yes. In the general legal context, especially regarding the collection of penalties owed to the state, it was a recognized practice to grant a, quote, a percentage of the recovered penalty to the successful plaintiff, the person who brought the case forward, acting supposedly on behalf of the community.
So if I successfully accuse my wealthy neighbor of treason, and he's condemned and his property confiscated, you, as the successful accuser, stood to gain a significant financial reward, a share of the spoils.
And when the target is a wealthy senator, that percentage, well, it could be a life-changing amount of money.
Absolutely. It essentially institutionalized a hunt for the rich. It created a profession out of accusation.
A very dangerous profession for everyone else.
Extremely. And the sources do indicate that the targets of these high-profile prosecutions, especially for maiestas, were disproportionately the elite, specifically senators. Their wealth made them targets.
We see records of this, even in seemingly private cases.
Yes, we have records of several private property cases that were heard directly by the emperors Severus and Caracalla later on.
And what were these cases about? Were they linked to treason?
Often, yes, indirectly. They frequently concerned the property of senators and were explicitly linked in the records to major political upheavals, specifically executions that took place during the notoriously paranoid final years of Emperor Commodus's reign.
So families trying to get property back after a purge.
It's exactly. The records show senators and their families constantly petitioning the emperor, seeking imperial intervention regarding their private affairs and property in the aftermath of these purges. They were trying to claw back assets the state had seized, or perhaps just confirm the legality of transactions made by or involving the executed individual before their condemnation.
This constant involvement of the emperor himself in private property disputes, often triggered by maiestas charges, it just demonstrates how completely the law had been co-opted, doesn't it?
It really does.
The Senate, the traditional heart of Rome's power structure, effectively became the primary victim pool for this predatory legal machine. Their great wealth became not a source of security, but a severe vulnerability.
The wealth itself was the magnet. Once the law of maiestas was fundamentally decoupled from protecting the state as a whole, and attached instead to protecting the ruler's person, his ego, and his treasury, well, it created a legal environment where arguably the most financially lucrative form of political loyalty was to denounce your wealthy neighbor or colleague. So what we've traced here is, I think, the profound tragedy of this concept, maiestas. It began as something quite specific, the dignity of the Roman state, requiring concrete action to compromise it, like Verus freeing prisoners.
Right, tangible harm.
But through this gradual systemic institutional decay, Tiberius starving the jury courts of resources, Caligula centralizing verdicts in his own hands, and eventually jurists like Ulpian finalizing the administrative shift away from juries, it morphed. It became a defense not of the state, but of the ruler's subjective will, his sensitivities, his paranoia.
And political suspicion, which is so easy to manufacture.
Exactly. amplified by the abolition of those checks and balances, and critically, driven by the immense financial incentive of property confiscation. Suspicion itself became sufficient. It led to a terrifying form of judicial efficiency. Quick accusation, quick seizure.
The irony is just breathtaking, isn't it? The legal structure, initially designed presumably to maintain integrity and stability for the Republic,
Was gradually twisted to become the primary mechanism facilitating tyranny. It fostered instability, paranoia, and ultimately destroyed the very governing class it supposedly relied upon.
we saw that with Gatulicus, right? A commander having to threaten revolt just to secure his own life from a politically motivated charge.
And with Silvanus, where the state's greed, triggered by suspicion, directly overrode the security of a whole province. The system turned inwards.
The law was effectively engineered, perhaps not consciously at first, but certainly in effect, to create a climate of fear. An environment where legal precedent was disposable, where judicial process was streamlined for speed and seizure, and where the accused was, for all practical purposes, guilty upon suspicion.
It's the enduring, chilling lesson of the law of diminished majesty. When the law serves primarily to protect one man's power and finances, it ultimately serves no one effectively. It corrupts everything.
Which really raises an important and quite unsettling question for you, the listener, to carry forward from this. Given that great wealth became almost synonymous with vulnerability, and given the incredible financial power granted to accusers through asset forfeiture, how did this constant weaponized legal threat actually affect the subtle, daily economic and social life of the Roman elite?
That's the deeper impact, isn't it?
How did they manage their finances? Who did they dare to associate with? What could they safely say in public or even in private letters? How did they plan for their families' futures, knowing that every single interaction, every business deal, every inheritance could potentially be retroactively deemed treasonous and cost them not just their reputation, but literally everything they owned and perhaps their lives? What was that constant pressure like?